She rose from the water thinking she was alone, then froze seeing the cowboy watching. The air was cool, fresh, and smelled of wet earth and growing plants. Birds were beginning their quiet songs, but the forest felt still, almost waiting. A young woman stepped carefully through the underbrush, her bare feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. Every step made her heart beat a little faster, not because she was in danger, but because of the thrill of being completely alone in the world at that moment. She had been walking for hours, maybe even days, and her body ached from the long journey. The sun was just starting to peek above the hills, casting a golden glow that touched the tops of the trees. She had reached a small, hidden river that cut through the forest, sparkling as it moved over the smooth stones. She knew this place would be her secret, her private moment to breathe, to wash away the dust, sweat, and worry she had carried with her. Carefully, she stepped into the cool water. It felt shocking at first, but then comforting. She let herself sink down until only her shoulders were above the surface, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. For the first time in days, she felt a kind of freedom. Here, in the quiet embrace of the river and the forest, she could pretend that the world outside didn't exist. She could be herself, without anyone telling her what to do or where to go. The water lapped softly around her, moving over the stones and carrying small leaves and petals downstream. She let her hands trail in the water, feeling its smoothness and the gentle pull of the current. The sound was calming like a lullaby, and for a moment she almost forgot that she had been running. Running from what she wasn't sure, from problems, from expectations, from something deeper that she didn't want to face yet. It didn't matter. All that mattered was this moment of peace, this secret refuge where she could be alone. Her mind wandered as she floated, thinking about the life she had left behind, about the small comforts she had given up to be here. The morning sun made patterns on the water, dancing like tiny flames across her skin. She laughed softly at the beauty of it, the kind of laugh that comes from relief and surprise. For a long while she stayed like that, letting the water hold her, letting the river's cool touch wash over every worry she had carried. But as she moved further into the river, she became aware of a small sound. A rustle from the trees, a branch bending under weight she hadn't noticed before. Her body tensed instantly. She told herself it was probably an animal, a deer, a bird, something harmless. Yet the thought didn't fully calm her. She scanned the forest with wide eyes, trying to see past the mist. The sunlight was stronger now, reflecting off the water and blinding her for a moment. She turned her head, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement. The river flowed gently, carrying little ripples that broke the reflection of the trees on the surface. She dipped her fingers into the water again, pretending to ignore the sound, convincing herself that the forest was empty. She liked the idea of being alone, of having a place untouched by anyone else's presence. But the feeling of being watched crept over her. It was subtle, like a shadow passing over her mind, but enough to make her heart beat a little faster. She tried to shake it off, closing her eyes and focusing on the sound of water. It was just her imagination, she told herself. She was safe. The world beyond this river couldn't touch her here. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and let herself float once more. The sunlight caught on her wet hair, making it shine like strands of gold. The water moved softly around her body, like the river was hugging her, and for a few minutes she believed she was truly alone. Slowly, she began to move again, standing up in the shallow part of the river. She rubbed her arms, feeling the water slide down her skin and run off in tiny streams. She laughed softly again, a sound that felt light and free in the empty forest. This was the kind of moment she had dreamed of, complete freedom, even if just for a few minutes. She could forget about the past, forget about the worries that had driven her here, forget about the world outside this hidden place. But the feeling of being alone, perfect and safe, was fragile. Every small sound, the rustle of leaves, The distant call of a bird, the snap of a twig made her pause and listen. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it really was just an animal. Maybe it was a friend or neighbor who had come looking for her. Or maybe it was someone else entirely. She shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts, and stepped further into the river, letting the cool water rise around her waist. For a long while, she moved through the water slowly, letting it carry away her fear as well as her exhaustion. She dipped her hands under the surface, feeling the smooth stones and small fish darting away at her touch. The river was alive, a quiet, gentle life that seemed to exist just for her in this secret corner of the forest. She smiled at the sensation, feeling a connection to something larger than herself. Then she stopped. Something about the forest felt different. There was a stillness that wasn't there before, a pause in the rhythm of birdsong and rustling leaves. She opened her eyes, scanning the edges of the river. At first, she saw nothing. But then a movement, a shadow, tall and upright just beyond the trees, made her freeze. She blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. The forest was supposed to be empty. She was supposed to be alone. And yet there it was. Something or someone was watching her. She didn't move, her breath catching in her throat. The sound of the river, once soothing, now seemed louder, almost mocking in its calmness. Her heart beat faster, and she felt a mix of fear and disbelief. How had someone come here without her noticing? How long had they been standing there? The questions tumbled in her mind, but no answers came. Her first instinct was to flee, to dive into the water and disappear into the current. But another part of her told her to stay still, to wait, to see. Whoever, or whatever, was watching hadn't made a sound. They hadn't threatened her, yet the feeling of being seen, completely exposed, sent shivers down her spine. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable she was. The shadow moved slightly, stepping closer to the river's edge. She caught a glimpse of a wide-brimmed hat and rough clothing, the kind worn by people who worked outdoors every day. Her mind raced. A traveler, a local farmer, or someone with less friendly intentions. Her body stayed frozen, half in the water, half on the bank, unsure whether to run or stay. The forest held its breath with her, the river murmuring quietly as if trying to soothe her. She realized that in this moment she was completely alone and completely exposed at the same time. No one was immediately threatening her, yet she could not shake the sense of being watched. It was a new kind of fear, one that mixed curiosity, caution, and disbelief. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds became minutes as she stared at the figure and the figure stared back. She had to remind herself to breathe, to slow her racing heart. She took a small step backward in the water, testing the riverbed, letting her instincts guide her movements. She had no weapon, no plan, only the river, the forest, and the unknown figure before her. And then, just as suddenly as the fear had struck, a strange calmness began to settle over her. The figure did not move aggressively. They seemed as curious as she was and not threatening. Perhaps this was someone who meant no harm, someone who had simply stumbled upon her secret refuge. Her mind flickered between caution and relief, and she realized that the river had given her more than just cleanliness. It had given her a moment of quiet reflection, of awareness, of preparation for what was to come. She didn't yet know who the watcher was or why they had appeared, but she knew one thing. She would never forget this morning. The water, the forest, the rising sun, and the presence of another human being, it had changed something inside her. She felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement, knowing that her solitude had ended and something new had begun. The figure at the edge of the river remained still, but the young woman could feel his presence clearly. She hadn't moved an inch, her eyes fixed on the tall, silent figure. Every instinct in her body screamed caution, yet something about the way he stood, calm, patient, almost hesitant, made her hesitate from fleeing. The sunlight glinted off the brim of his wide hat, and she could make out the outline of rough clothing, the kind that suggested he spent much of his life outdoors. His boots were planted firmly in the soft earth, and his hands rested loosely at his sides. Her mind raced. Who was he? Why was he here? What did he want? The questions bounced around, each one more urgent than the last. She considered turning and running deeper into the forest, hoping to lose him among the trees. But the river, wide and deep, separated her from the thick woods, and she knew she could not escape so easily without exposing herself to more risk. Her heart pounded, her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay still. If she panicked, she might make a mistake. The man tilted his head slightly, almost as if he were studying her. He did not make a sudden move, did not raise his voice, and did not approach aggressively. Instead, he simply watched. The young woman felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. Why was he not leaving? Why had he come here, to this hidden river, to see her? Her body wanted to move, to hide, to do anything to regain the illusion of safety. Yet her mind was filled with questions she could not yet answer. After a moment that seemed to stretch endlessly, the man spoke, his voice low and calm. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a softness she did not expect. He stepped just a little closer, careful not to make sudden movements. "I've been walking through the forest and noticed someone at the river. I didn't want to frighten you." The young woman's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out immediately. Her mind struggled to process the situation. Here was a stranger, someone who could have caused her harm, yet instead he was speaking in a tone that suggested he meant no danger. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she nodded, acknowledging him without speaking. Her body still trembled, not from cold, but from the mixture of fear and uncertainty. He shifted his weight slightly and spoke again. "I'm just a local rancher. I live nearby and often walk through these woods. I wasn't expecting anyone here this early, and I certainly didn't expect to see you." The words were honest, almost casual, but they carried a sense of experience. His voice had the rough warmth of someone who had spent years working outdoors, someone who understood the land and its quiet rhythms. The young woman finally found her voice, though it was small and hesitant. I didn't think anyone would be here," she said. Her eyes did not leave him, her arms still wrapped around herself as if to protect her exposed body. "I thought I was alone." The words hung in the air, fragile and honest. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "You are not in any danger," he said. "I won't come any closer than this. I respect your privacy." His hands stayed where they were, his movements deliberate and calm. The young woman felt a flicker of relief, though it was tempered by lingering fear. He was still a stranger after all, and she had no reason to fully trust him yet. The river flowed quietly between them, carrying small ripples over the stones. The sunlight danced on the water, making patterns that seemed almost magical. She watched the light and tried to focus on it, letting the beauty of the river calm her racing thoughts. For a moment, the fear that had held her frozen began to loosen its grip. She realized that the man was not threatening her, and that awareness brought a strange sense of comfort. Still cautious, she moved a little further into the river, letting the water rise around her waist. The coolness of it was soothing, grounding her in the present. She kept her eyes on the man, studying him as he studied her. There was something honest about his posture, something that suggested he would not harm her. She noticed the way he shifted his weight, the careful way he avoided making sudden moves. It was as if he understood the unspoken rules of the forest and her presence within it. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," he said after a pause, his voice gentle. "But I'm curious, why are you here all alone?" His question was simple, not intrusive, but it carried a sense of genuine interest. The young woman hesitated. She had been alone for so long, running from her past, running from the pressures of life, that talking to someone, even a stranger, felt strange and vulnerable. After a long breath, she spoke softly. "I needed to be alone. I've been walking for a long time, and I just needed this moment." Her words were honest, and as they left her mouth she felt a small weight lift. She did not explain everything. She did not need to, but she acknowledged the truth of her actions. She was here to find a quiet place, a place where the world could not reach her, even if only for a few minutes. The man nodded again, understanding. "I know that feeling," he said. "Sometimes you just need to get away, to be somewhere no one else can find you. I come here sometimes for the same reason." His words carried a quiet wisdom, a recognition of the solitude she craved. The young woman felt a strange connection forming, a bridge of understanding between them, even though they had just met. She adjusted her position in the water, letting herself float slightly, and studied him more carefully. He was middle-aged, with sun-darkened skin and a face that suggested years of outdoor work. There was a calmness about him, a grounded presence that contrasted sharply with the tension she had felt when she first saw him. She realized that his presence, though unexpected, was not threatening. In fact, it felt oddly protective, as if he had come into the forest by chance but had chosen to respect her space. For several minutes, they simply observed each other in silence. The river flowed between them, carrying away small leaves and petals. Birds flitted through the trees, singing their morning songs. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The world paused for this quiet encounter. The young woman felt her fear slowly melting into curiosity. She wanted to know more about this man, about his life, about the world he came from, but she also wanted to maintain the delicate balance of distance and safety. Finally, he spoke again. "If you want, I can give you some cover," he said, glancing at the blanket he had draped over his arm. "It's not much, but it will keep you warm until you're ready to leave the water." The young woman hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger was always risky, but the gesture was gentle and non-threatening. She nodded slowly, stepping closer to the edge where he stood. He handed her the blanket carefully, keeping his hands low and his movements slow. She wrapped it around herself, feeling the warmth of the cloth seep into her skin. It was a small act, but it carried a sense of trust. She still didn't know him, but for the first time in hours, or maybe days, she felt a glimmer of safety. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and tentative. The words felt heavy with relief and gratitude. The man simply nodded, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be right here if you need me." As the minutes passed, the initial shock of being watched began to fade. She felt a new sense of awareness, realizing that even strangers could show kindness, that not everyone who entered her life meant harm. The river, the forest, and this unexpected encounter had shifted something inside her. She felt a mixture of caution and curiosity, fear and relief, all swirling together in a complex but strangely comforting way. The young woman adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and took a deep breath. She was still cautious, still aware of her vulnerability, but she was no longer paralyzed by fear. The cowboy's presence, calm and respectful, had given her a chance to recover, to think, to regain control of her situation. The river no longer felt like a place of complete isolation. It was a space where human connection could exist, even unexpectedly. She glanced at him again, seeing the quiet strength in his posture, the honesty in his eyes. For the first time since she had stepped into the river, she felt a flicker of trust. Not complete trust, not yet, but enough to let go of some of her fear. She realized that this encounter, simple as it seemed, was already changing her. The forest, the river, and the unexpected presence of another human being had created a moment she would never forget. A moment where fear met understanding, and vulnerability met kindness. The young woman wrapped the blanket more tightly around her shoulders, feeling its warmth seep into her cold, damp skin. The river continued to flow quietly, its gentle murmur like a soft companion to the uneasy calm between her and the cowboy. She still could not fully relax. Every instinct she had told her to stay alert, to be ready for anything. And yet, as she studied the man, she noticed details that made her chest ease just a little. His movements were slow, deliberate, careful. He didn't move toward her too quickly, and there was a sense of patience in the way he waited. "I don't mean to disturb you," he said again, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "I just didn't want you to feel unsafe." His words were simple, yet they carried an honesty she could sense. The young woman hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand who he was and why he had come here. Another part of her, the cautious part, wanted to remain silent, to hide behind the blanket, to protect herself from any possible threat. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Why are you here so early?" Her voice was small but steady. She kept her eyes on him, watching his reaction carefully. The cowboy nodded, as if expecting the question. "I usually ride through these woods in the early morning," he explained. "The forest is quiet then, the air is fresh, and it's a good way to start the day. I didn't expect to find anyone here, especially not in the river." He paused, giving her space to respond. "I come here often just to walk or check on the land, nothing more." She considered his words. There was something simple and believable in his explanation. The way he spoke, the calmness of his voice, and the lack of tension in his posture suggested that he was telling the truth. And yet, she still did not fully trust him. Trust, she knew, had to be earned. "I see," she said cautiously, pulling the blanket closer around herself. She let her eyes wander to the river, to the dancing sunlight on the water, and tried to steady her racing heart. Her body still tensed at every small movement, every sound from the forest. The branches swaying in the gentle breeze sounded louder than they should have. Every bird call, every rustle of leaves, reminded her that she was still exposed, still vulnerable. The cowboy seemed to notice her tension. "If it helps, I can step back," he offered, pointing to a spot further from the riverbank. "I don't want to crowd you. You should feel safe here." His tone was patient, free of judgment. She studied him, noting the sincerity in his eyes. He didn't push, didn't insist, and that small act of respect began to chip away at her fear. I think I'll stay here for a moment," she said softly, unsure why she even felt the need to explain herself. Her voice sounded fragile, almost like it had been forgotten in the long hours she had spent alone in the forest. But the cowboy only nodded and smiled gently, his quiet approval making her feel just a little more at ease. Time passed slowly. The river flowed steadily, the water moving over stones and carrying leaves downstream. The sun climbed higher, spilling more golden light over the forest, and she could feel its warmth on her skin. She adjusted the blanket again and let herself float slightly in the shallow water, letting the coolness soothe her tense muscles. She was beginning to realize something important. Despite the fear that had frozen her when she first saw him, the cowboy's patience and calm presence were teaching her how to breathe again, how to feel a little less alone in the world. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," the cowboy said, breaking the silence. "But I'm curious, what brings someone like you to a place like this?" His question was careful, gentle, not prying or demanding. She considered ignoring it, but something about his calm tone made her want to answer. I needed to be away from everything," she said quietly. Her eyes were fixed on the river as she spoke, tracing the small ripples that moved over the stones. "I've been walking for a long time. I just needed a place where no one could see me, a place where I could breathe." Her words trembled slightly, but they were honest. She hadn't shared her reasons with anyone for days, not even with herself. The cowboy nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I understand," he said softly. "Sometimes you just need to get away from the noise, from the world. This forest, this river, it gives you a kind of peace you can't find anywhere else." There was a pause before he added, "I've been coming here for years for the same reason." She looked at him then, really looked, noticing the lines on his face, the sun-darkened skin, the strength in his hands. She realized that despite his rugged exterior, he seemed genuinely kind. There was no rush in his actions, no hidden motives, only patience and understanding. She felt a spark of relief, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe, she thought, not everyone out there was dangerous. Maybe some people could be trusted. A soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and fresh leaves. The young woman adjusted the blanket around her shoulders again, feeling the warmth and safety it offered. She floated for a few moments, letting herself relax just a little, while the cowboy stood silently on the riverbank, giving her the space she needed. "You've been walking a long time, haven't you?" he asked gently after a while. His voice was quiet, almost like he didn't want to disturb the delicate balance of calm that had settled over the river. "Yes," she admitted. "I've been moving for days. I don't really know where I'm going." Her words carried a mixture of weariness and honesty. For the first time in a long time, she felt comfortable sharing even a little of her story with someone she barely knew. The cowboy nodded again, as if acknowledging a shared understanding of life's hardships. "I know that feeling," he said softly. "Sometimes you just keep moving, not because you have to, but because it's the only way forward. I've spent a lot of time walking these lands, thinking about life, thinking about what comes next." She considered his words. There was something comforting in knowing that someone else understood the restlessness, the desire to escape, the need for solitude. She had been so alone for so long, she had almost forgotten that others might share the same feelings. The quiet wisdom in his words brought a strange comfort. After a while, she began to notice small details about him. The gentle way he adjusted his hat to keep the sun out of his eyes, the slow but deliberate movement of his hands as he rested them on his belt, the calmness in his posture that contrasted sharply with her own tension. She realized that despite the initial fear, she was beginning to trust him, at least enough to speak a little, to share a small part of herself. The river water flowed steadily, carrying away small leaves and petals, moving quietly beneath her. She floated slightly, letting the water soothe her tired muscles, while the cowboy continued to stand a respectful distance away, silent but present. Time moved slowly, but it was not uncomfortable. In fact, it was almost peaceful, a moment of quiet understanding that neither of them had expected to find. "I can stay here as long as you need," the cowboy said after another pause. "I won't come closer unless you want me to." His voice was calm, and she sensed the honesty in his words. There was no hidden agenda, no rush, only patience and respect. She felt her heart slow, the tension that had gripped her body loosening just a little. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were sincere, filled with relief and a hint of gratitude. The cowboy nodded again, giving her a small, reassuring smile. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a quiet weight, a promise that she was not alone, that someone could be trusted, even in the middle of a forest she had thought was entirely hers. For several minutes, they remained like that, she in the river, wrapped in the blanket and he on the bank, standing quietly. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the sun rising higher in the sky and casting golden light over everything. The river continued to flow, the gentle sound of moving water like a rhythm that matched the slowly calming beat of her heart. She realized slowly that her fear had not disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer a sharp, paralyzing panic. It was a cautious awareness, a reminder that she needed to be careful but that not everyone in the world intended harm. The cowboy's presence, calm and patient, had shown her that. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could trust someone again. The young woman adjusted the blanket around her shoulders again, feeling its warmth seep into her damp clothes. The early morning sun had climbed higher now, spilling light over the river and making the water sparkle like scattered diamonds. She floated slowly, letting the current move her gently over the shallow stones. She was no longer frozen with fear, but the caution that had gripped her still lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. The cowboy remained on the riverbank, his posture relaxed but alert, giving her space while also being present. There was a quiet patience about him that she found both comforting and strange. She had been alone for so long that human interaction felt unfamiliar, even risky. And yet she realized she was starting to feel something she had not felt in days, a connection, however small, with another human being. After a long pause, he spoke again. "If you're cold, I can show you a place where you can dry off and rest for a while," he said gently. "It's not far from here, just past the bend in the river. There's a small clearing with sunlight and some soft grass." The young woman hesitated. The offer was generous, and the idea of stepping out of the river and into warmth was tempting. Yet part of her wanted to remain in the water, safe in the illusion of isolation she had built around herself. She weighed her options, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease as she considered him. She could sense that he would not force her, that he would respect her choice either way. "I may be for a few minutes," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She wanted to test his trustworthiness before fully moving toward him. The cowboy nodded, giving a small, understanding smile. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush." Slowly, she began to wade toward the riverbank, feeling the cool water slide over her legs. The riverbed was uneven, and her bare feet brushed over smooth stones, sending small ripples through the water. With each step, she became more aware of her surroundings. The soft chirping of birds, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the way the sunlight made patterns on the flowing water. It was a world that existed only for her at this moment, quiet and beautiful, yet filled with a subtle tension she could not ignore. When she reached the riverbank, she hesitated again, gripping the blanket tightly around herself. The cowboy watched patiently, giving her the space she needed to regain control of the situation. He remained a few feet away, not closing the distance too quickly, and that careful patience spoke volumes to her. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she moved toward him, stepping onto the soft grass near the clearing. "You're safe here," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. "There's no one else around and you don't need to worry." She nodded, though her eyes remained cautious. She wanted to trust him, to believe his words, but old habits die slowly. The fear of being alone and exposed had been with her for so long that letting it go entirely would take time. Still, she felt the first flicker of relief. The river, the forest, and this unexpected encounter had created a space where she could start to breathe again. The cowboy moved slightly, kneeling on one knee to show he meant no harm, and extended his hand with a small bundle. "I brought something for you," he said. "Some dry clothes I had in my saddlebag. Nothing fancy, but they'll keep you warm until you're ready to move on." She blinked, surprised. The gesture was unexpected, simple yet thoughtful. Her first instinct was to decline, but she realized that this was an act of genuine kindness. Slowly, she took the clothes, feeling a sense of gratitude she had not felt in days. She didn't know him, and she didn't have to. But in this moment, she understood that small acts of consideration could bridge the distance between strangers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The cowboy nodded, smiling faintly but not forcing her to say more. His patience allowed her to feel comfortable, to take control of her actions without fear of judgment. As she changed into the dry clothes, she noticed how the sunlight had shifted, highlighting the soft green of the grass and the golden edges of the trees. The forest felt alive, almost protective, as if it too understood the fragile moment unfolding in the clearing. She adjusted the blanket over her shoulders once more, feeling a mix of warmth and vulnerability. The cowboy sat on a nearby rock, keeping his distance but maintaining a watchful presence. "You've been through a lot," he said gently. "It's okay to take a moment to rest, to breathe, to feel safe." She hesitated before replying. The words stuck in her throat, memories of recent struggles and long walks flashing in her mind. Finally, she spoke softly. I haven't had a safe place in a long time. I didn't think I'd find one here." The cowboy nodded slowly, his gaze steady and understanding. "Sometimes the safest places are the ones we stumble upon by accident," he said. "And sometimes the people we meet by accident can help us more than we expect." His words sank into her, offering a strange comfort. She realized that in his presence, she could start to let go of some of her fear, even if only a little. The world outside the forest had been harsh, full of challenges and uncertainty, but here, in this quiet clearing, she began to feel a sense of belonging, however fragile it might be. For several minutes they sat in silence, the river flowing quietly nearby. The cowboy did not speak unless necessary, allowing the young woman to process her thoughts and emotions. The forest seemed to hold its breath with them, the sunlight warm on their faces, the gentle rustle of leaves a soothing backdrop. In this moment there was no rush, no expectation, only the shared presence of two humans finding connection in an unexpected place. She finally took a deep breath and looked at him, noticing the faint smile on his face. I feel a little better," she admitted. Her voice was small but sincere, a sign that trust, however tentative, was beginning to grow. "That's good," he said softly. "You should. You deserve to feel safe even if just for a little while." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. For the first time since she had stepped into the river, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the world wasn't as harsh as she had believed. Maybe there were people out there who could be trusted, who could show kindness without expecting anything in return. The thought was comforting yet new, and she allowed herself to sit quietly, soaking it in. The cowboy shifted slightly, offering her a small smile. "If you like, I can walk with you along the river for a while. Not too close, just enough so you don't feel completely alone." She considered the offer. The idea of walking with someone, of having a companion even temporarily, was both frightening and comforting. She weighed the risks and possibilities carefully. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. Slowly, they began to move along the riverbank, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of trust that had formed. The young woman walked with cautious steps, feeling the soft grass beneath her feet and the warmth of the sun on her face. The cowboy maintained a respectful distance, allowing her space while offering reassurance through his calm presence. As they walked, the forest seemed to embrace them. Birds flitted through the trees, the sunlight danced on the river, and the gentle rustle of leaves created a rhythm that matched the steadying of her heart. She felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity, realizing that this unexpected encounter was teaching her something important. That connection, trust, and kindness could exist even in the most unlikely places. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a little joy. She laughed softly at the sparkling water, at the way the sunlight made patterns on the leaves, at the simple beauty of being alive. The cowboy smiled at her quietly, respecting her moments of expression without intruding. Minutes turned into a gentle rhythm of walking and quiet observation. She noticed small details about him, the way he moved, the care he took not to step on delicate plants, the calm steadiness in his voice when he spoke. Each observation added to her growing sense of trust, showing her that he was not only respectful but thoughtful, someone who understood the balance between presence and space. By the time they reached a small bend in the river, the young woman felt a subtle shift within herself. The fear that had gripped her when she first rose from the water was no longer dominating her thoughts. Instead, she felt a cautious optimism, a belief that perhaps, even in unexpected encounters, kindness and trust could grow. The cowboy stopped at the bend, turning to look at her with a gentle expression. "You don't have to go any further if you don't want to," he said softly. "This spot is safe, quiet, and beautiful. You can rest here as long as you need." She looked around at the gentle curve of the river, the sunlight reflecting on the water and the peaceful forest surrounding them. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet gratitude. The cowboy smiled faintly, giving her space while remaining close enough to offer reassurance. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to truly relax, to let go of the tension that had gripped her since entering the river. In this quiet clearing, with the calm presence of a stranger who had become an unexpected ally, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in days, or perhaps even weeks. The young woman sat quietly on the soft grass near the river bend, feeling the sunlight warm her damp skin and the gentle breeze ruffle her hair. For the first time since she had entered the river, she felt a sense of calm settle over her, a calm that was both fragile and profound. She had been through fear, uncertainty, and hesitation, but now, in the quiet presence of the cowboy, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: peace. The cowboy remained nearby, sitting on a fallen log a few feet away, his gaze soft and respectful. He didn't speak, knowing that silence could sometimes be more comforting than words. The river flowed steadily, carrying leaves and small twigs downstream, its gentle murmuring like a quiet song meant only for her. The sunlight sparkled on the surface, creating patterns that seemed almost magical. It was a moment suspended in time, where nothing in the world outside mattered. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She reflected on how far she had come, both physically and emotionally. She had started the morning feeling exposed, vulnerable, and alone. Fear had gripped her as soon as she saw the shadowy figure at the riverbank. Every instinct had screamed for her to run, to hide, to protect herself from the unknown. And yet she had not run. She had stayed, she had listened, and she had allowed herself to be seen. Opening her eyes, she glanced at the cowboy again. There was a quiet strength in the way he sat, the way he watched her without pressing for attention or answers. He was someone who had chosen patience over intrusion, understanding over judgment. She realized that in allowing herself to stay, she had discovered more than safety. She had discovered a new understanding of trust, of human kindness, and of the subtle power of empathy. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, almost to herself as much as to him. "You could have left and I wouldn't have blamed you." He looked at her, his expression gentle, and missed seeing someone finally able to breathe a little. "No, I couldn't do that," he replied, his voice calm, steady, and kind. "Sometimes people need a moment of quiet, of safety, and if I can provide that, then I'm happy to." The young woman felt a small smile tug at her lips. It was strange how someone she had only just met could have such a calming effect on her. But she realized that kindness had a way of reaching even the most cautious hearts. Even in the short time they had shared, his patience, respect, and understanding had offered her something she hadn't expected. Reassurance that not all strangers were dangerous, that not all encounters had to be frightening, and that human connection, even brief, could be powerful. She took a deep breath and let herself look around at the forest. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden streaks, and the river sparkled as it flowed onward. It was a place of beauty and serenity, but also a place of reflection. She realized that this moment, these few hours by the river with the cowboy, would stay with her forever. It was a turning point, a reminder that life could hold unexpected kindness even in the midst of fear and uncertainty. After a while she stood slowly, feeling the grass beneath her feet and the soft pull of the river in the distance. The cowboy stood as well, giving her the space to move freely, not rushing or crowding her. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and felt the warmth settle into her body, grounding her. "I think I'm ready to move on," she said, her voice soft but confident. She had regained control of her thoughts and emotions. She felt stronger, more aware of herself and her surroundings, and more prepared to face the challenges ahead. The cowboy nodded, smiling faintly. "Take your time," he said. "The river will still be here, the forest will still be here, and so will this spot whenever you need it." His words carried a quiet wisdom, a gentle reminder that the world, while unpredictable, could also offer stability and reassurance if she allowed herself to notice it. As she began walking along the riverbank, the young woman felt the blanket fall lightly over her shoulders. She noticed the small details she hadn't paid attention to before, the way the sunlight caught on the water, the distant chirping of birds, the smooth stones under her feet. Each step felt lighter than the last, a physical reminder that she was no longer weighed down by fear. The cowboy walked beside her at a respectful distance, silent but present. She felt the subtle reassurance of his presence, knowing he would not intrude but was there if she needed support. Their walk along the river was quiet, the only sounds being the river's gentle flow, the whispering leaves, and their own footsteps. The solitude of the forest, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had transformed into a space of reflection, growth, and understanding. As they reached a small clearing farther down the river, the young woman paused and looked around. The sunlight was warmer here, casting soft shadows across the grass and illuminating the delicate patterns on the water's surface. She felt a surge of gratitude for this moment, for the quiet beauty of the forest, and for the unexpected kindness of the cowboy who had become a quiet guide, not just in the physical space of the forest, but in the emotional journey she had experienced that morning. I wanted to thank you," she said finally, turning to face him, "for staying, for being patient, for helping me feel safe again." Her voice was soft, sincere, and filled with emotion. She realized that these words were more than a polite gesture. They were a recognition of the impact he had on her, the way he had helped her reclaim a sense of calm and trust she hadn't known in a long time. The cowboy's expression softened. "You didn't need me to do anything special," he said. "Sometimes all anyone needs is a little patience, a little understanding. You had the strength all along, you just needed a safe space to let it show." She felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. Indeed, the journey she had been on, through fear, uncertainty, and solitude, had led her here to a place where she could finally breathe. The cowboy had not saved her, he had only offered support. The real strength had always been inside her. For a long while, they stood in the clearing, watching the river flow and listening to the gentle sounds of the forest. The young woman felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the cowboy's kindness, but for the journey itself, the fear, the uncertainty, the moments of courage that had carried her to this point. She realized that life was unpredictable, that moments of danger and isolation could appear at any time, but so could moments of connection, kindness, and understanding. Eventually, the young woman began walking back toward the main path, the forest stretching out ahead of her like an open promise. The cowboy walked a few steps behind, giving her the freedom to lead while still offering silent support. She felt lighter, freer, and more confident than she had in days. Each step was a reminder that she could move forward, that fear no longer needed to control her, and that she had the strength to navigate life's uncertainties. Before parting ways, she turned to him one last time. "I will never forget this morning," she said softly. "The river, the forest, and you." The cowboy nodded, a small smile on his face. "And I won't forget it either," he said. "Sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that stay with us the longest." With that, she stepped onto the main path, the forest opening up to the world beyond. She felt the warmth of the sun, the gentle flow of the river beside her, and a newfound sense of courage. She realized that, although the encounter had been unexpected, it had changed her in a way she could carry forward. She had learned that trust could be rebuilt, that kindness could appear in the most unlikely places, and that even brief connections could leave a lasting mark on the heart. As the clearing behind her faded into the distance, she took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and hope. The river would continue to flow, the forest would continue to stand, and the memory of this morning, the fear, the patience, the kindness, and the trust, would remain with her forever. She was no longer just a lone traveler in the forest. She was someone who had faced fear, allowed connection, and discovered strength in vulnerability. With each step along the path, she felt lighter, freer, and more ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world outside the forest was still uncertain, still unpredictable, but she knew one thing for certain. She had the courage to move forward, the wisdom to recognize kindness, and the strength to embrace life, even in its most unexpected moments.